In this video, I'm going to talk about a few tips for debugging, especially on using breakpoints. I built a simple app with a button that you press and it increases 1 to this label. So let's try to add our first breakpoint. You can see here on the breakpoint tab that you can see all your breakpoints. And if I press the button, it will stop here. Then I can see the variables that count is 0. I can see that this other variable loop count is also 0. You can check in the console here as well things like count, PO count or E count. It's different kinds of way to get your variable. Now to continue, you would press this button or type C, and then you can continue. Many people use print to debug, so if you want to know count here, some people would print here, but you would have to run your app again, and if your app is big, this is not very efficient. So of course you can use breakpoints. If you double tap on the breakpoint, there are a lot of options here. You can, for example, add an action with a log message and do count is count, for example. And if you click this option, it won't stop here. It will just perform whatever action you have. So let's try it. So if I press the button, you can see here on the console, it's logging the message. Another fun thing you can do is instead of log message, you can speak the message. So
count is 6.
Yeah, you can do fun things with it. Or instead of logging, you could play a sound just to know that the code went through here. You can use that. What else? You could say add a condition, for example, only to break here, only when count is bigger than 10, or let's say less than 10, or count is bigger than 13. So if I continue here, it will stop, and then didn't stop, didn't stop, didn't stop, didn't stop, and now it stopped again. So yeah, you can do that if you know when you need to break. You can also ignore. If I do like ignore 3, it won't break there for 3 times. 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th. So this can also be useful when you know how many times you have to ignore. Another thing that is useful, for example, when you're fixing your code, for example, you want to, instead of add 1, you need to add 2. You can do that without rerunning your app. So you can add an action of the debugger command. Then you could jump this line, for example. So thread jump. You can do by 1. So this will jump this line. Let's test it. So, oops, I think I wrote it wrong. Let's jump. So now if I press the button, nothing happens. And then you could add one action here, maybe expression, add 2. So now you can test how your code would work adding 2 instead of 1. without running the app. Another thing you can do is, for example, if you want to know when loop count changes. So you stop somewhere and you go to loop count here, do a right click and do watch loop count. Now if you go to the breakpoint, you have a watchpoints instead of breakpoint. Now if you tap your button, as soon as loop count changes, the app will stop and you can go in your thread and check where in your code it was changed. So here loop count changed and that's why it stopped. Next, if you had, for example, an error, Swift error here, and then this function froze. Let's do this, and here you try. So let me run this again. Okay, so if the count goes above 10, it will start throwing this error. But notice you usually don't get any warning. So in case you wanted to stop running when this happens, you could go here to your breakpoints and then on the bottom tap the plus and add Swift Error Breakpoint. Now your app will stop when that error is thrown. Another thing we can test is, suppose you have this struct users, and then here on view did load, you create an user and try to add it to UserDefaults. So if I run this, I get this error. It's in app delegate, so it's hard to know what happened. There are no useful log here in the bottom. If you go up, you can find some more useful information here. Attempt to insert known property list object debugging. So there is some useful information, but if you want to know the location of the problem, you can go here to breakpoints, tap the plus button, and then add exception breakpoint. So next time, if you run the app again, and that problem happens, your app will stop before crashing. So here you can see the same error as before, but now you know the location and you can fix it. This case, you have to transform this to, for example, encode. You can't save custom types to UserDefaults. So by doing this, you will save instead a string. So yeah, this time it worked. You can just leave these types of breakpoints on all the time, and it will help you when something happens. A good thing to do so your code doesn't go somewhere when a breakpoint is hit, you can come to here Xcode preferences, then behaviors, running, pauses, and then you can add show tab named, and then you can add a name such as debugging, And instead of this happening, let's try again. So now every time you start to debug, a new tab called Debugging will open. You can check everything here and then just close it and go back to whatever you were doing before. So that's also useful. So yeah, this was just some simple tips for debugging. I hope it was helpful. Thank you and good coding.